Thanks so much for joining me this afternoon. In about a half hour's time, I promised I'd tell you about a debacle that has happened in Health Canada with the brand new Justin Trudeau dental program. And I'll get your reaction to that just after 3 o'clock. Right now, I want to talk about another federal issue. Yesterday, the Auditor General, her name's Karen Hogan, found some significant problems in government-provided housing for our Canadian military families. Here she is earlier today on the Vashi Capello show talking about her findings.
We visited 3 bases. And what we found there is that 32 out of 35 of the buildings on the base were in need of at least one high priority repair. Only 5% of those were done by the end of our audit. And when I mean high priority repair, I'm talking about things like making sure the water in the building is safe to use, so it's potable, whether the toilets were functioning properly. In some cases, there was exterior walls, so structural issues that needed repairs. And those are the kind of living conditions you and I wouldn't want us to live in, and I don't think the kind of living conditions we would expect our Canadian Armed Forces members to live in.
That was the Auditor General federally. Joining me to talk about this and other issues impacting our military in 2025 is someone who has both government and military experience, former leader of the Conservative Party, Erin O'Toole. He is now President and Managing Director of ADIT North America. Welcome back to the show, Erin.
Good to be back with you, Deb.
So let's start with your reaction to what the Auditor General found. Curious whether you are surprised by this or just happy that it's out there because it's been such a long-standing issue.
Well, sadly, I'm not really surprised. You know, I was one of the few parliamentarians that served, and I actually served at one of those bases, Trenton. So she toured Trenton here in Ontario, Esquimalt in BC, and Gagetown, New Brunswick. And when I served in the 90s, many of these base accommodations and housing were old. And there's been a neglect ever since. And there were some proposals to have a lot of capital investment, including some public-private partnerships during the Trudeau government. And all of that stuff was either delayed or canceled or not budgeted for. So at a time we're also not meeting our recruitment goals, how can you really attract people to serve this higher calling if they're going to have these terrible conditions? So I'm glad it's out there. I'm glad the new minister, David McGuinty, is committed to fixing it. I think it should be a huge priority because it's part of the whole malaise the military is in right now.
How did we get here? Like, I'm talking both the recruitment and obviously the living conditions, and you can't separate one from the other, as you just said. But like, is this just simply lack of government priority? They didn't care? I mean, unbelievable, quite frankly.
Well, I do think the Trudeau government was particularly bad in terms of prioritizing military spending and military issues broadly. But to be honest, Deb, this goes back decades, and both parties wear a bit of this. You know, we live traditionally on top of an ally who was the most powerful country in the world and our biggest friend that we could always count on. That is somewhat on shaky ground. But our Arctic and our oceans also protected us. So there was a sense that Canadians had that we didn't need national defense. We would go and do overseas missions. We have a proud history in the wars and in Korea and Afghanistan and peacekeeping. But we didn't really do enough here at home. And so now we're playing a bit of catch up, not just on the big picture issues like Arctic sovereignty, but on the nitty gritty day-to-day stuff that you expect, which is the proper barracks and housing accommodation for both single members in the military and for military families. Some of the married quarters, or the PMQs they called, are equally bad. So I think there needs to be a lot of investment. And in some cases, maybe public-private partnerships, because a lot of urban bases, you could build out accommodation that could also serve the wider community while you're investing. So let's get creative and let's move quickly.
Do you think the numbers that are being touted by Prime Minister Carney will actually flow to some of the day-to-day, or, you know, the sexier stuff, the bigger stuff, given our relationship, as you point out, with the Americans, is in the bigger things? So do you have any hope that will, address all of this, I guess?
I do have hope. I'm an optimistic person, Deb, as you may know. I also know David McGuinty from his work on intelligence and national intelligence. He actually cares a great deal about the military. I will give him full credit for that. What he needs to do is push a cumbersome and, quite frankly, ineffective bureaucracy to get some of this done. There's actually an agency called Defense Construction that builds all these things on bases. The National Defense is one of the largest land and property holders in the federal government. So there's kind of a complacency that, sets in bureaucracies where they just delay things if they don't agree with the direction. So I think he really needs to take the bull by the horns here and look at, as I said, opportunities for partnerships so that you can build really innovative housing. Australia's done a model where they will buy some homes in the regular community so that not all military families are kind of behind the walls of the base. So I think there's things we can learn from what our allies do. The Americans do this very well, where morale, quality of life, family supports like a gym and activities for your children while you're deployed, that all factors in on whether someone's going to join or whether someone's going to stay in. So if we let this continue to be bad, we're going to continue to not meet our recruiting targets. And that's something the Auditor General also highlighted, is we're falling short of what we need to even have proper personnel in the Canadian Armed Forces.
I'm chatting with Erin O'Toole. He's a former leader in both our political world and our military world, now president and managing director of ADIT North America. As we get closer to November 11th, sadly, that's when many people kind of focus on what's happening with our military and think about our military. And I say sadly because often it's just once a year. There are a number of other issues, I think, that are challenging. Globe Mail just did a story last week about a veteran who's trying to make the case for traumatic brain injury as something that our Veterans Affairs would compensate him for and support him for, and he's getting nowhere. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, this is something called traumatic brain injury or concussion syndrome that we're really just starting to learn about, something I do some work on with the Concussion Legacy Foundation. We need to get proper protection for headgear for our soldiers, also for hockey and football and these sorts of things, because sometimes repetitive concussion, we've seen that can cause real issues. So the Veterans Affairs has to realize that some of these prolonged injuries, particularly for combat arms or for fighter pilots, they're going to leave with potential for some of these injuries. So we have to have not only support for them when they leave, as much preventative stuff as possible. And Ontario actually has taken the lead on this in terms of Rowan's Law and concussion prevention in young people. A private member's bill from Lisa MacLeod a few years ago helped create a protocol so that we don't get repeated concussions, which can lead to serious illness or even sadly death, as it was with the young girl Rowan. So the military is slow in terms of adapting to this, and we're trying to push, because anyone in these combat arms and these hard driving profession of arms will have exposure to these concussive forces. We need to give them the proper protection, and we need to ensure they're taken care of after they've served their country. So as November approaches, remember to get your poppy at the beginning of November, and we also have to do these updates of policies to make sure we're giving the best care possible to our people in uniform and when they retire.
I focused on the sort of what is Veterans Affairs doing after these happen, but I just want to make sure I heard you correctly. We aren't doing adequate protection in our equipment?
Well, we are now getting better now, but you have people even in the last generation, even when I would have served, not adequate head and hearing protection all the time. It wasn't taken as seriously. It is today. But what we also have to do is update our training methods, because particularly for our special forces and people that breach buildings and do counterterrorism work, things like this, if you're potentially getting injured repeatedly in training, a lot of that should be able to be avoided. So the militaries in the US, UK, Canada, Australia, all our closest allies, we're all struggling with how to give realistic training conditions without potentially injuring people or developing chronic injury issues while just training. When you're deployed in the theater of war, that's something you can't control, but you certainly can control training. So the Canadian Armed Forces has come a long way, but this is an area that it's a bit cutting edge, both for sports as well. You're now seeing sports teams have concussion protocols that just weren't there 10 years ago. So I think as we're getting more comfortable with this, we have to make sure we're getting our people the best equipment possible, but also making sure that training and programs and policies keep up with the latest science to protect our people.
Erin O'Toole, I so appreciate your time this afternoon. He's the president and managing director of ADIT North America. Thanks so much for joining me.
Always good chatting, Deb. Thank you.